So before we jump into it, why don't you tell people your name and what it is you do?
Yes, sir. So my name is Patrick Shaw, and I am the founder slash executive director of a nonprofit 501c3 organization out here in Portland, Oregon, and it is called For Fathers. And a lot of people ask me, why the name For Fathers, and it's really a play on words because it is for fathers, which is FOUR, but also too getting back to our roots and the foundation of our community, especially the Black and Brown community, which is the FORE, the forefathers, those that came before us. And we really focus on advocating for fathers to be instrumental in their families' lives. And family includes their spouse as well as the child, too. And a lot of emotional trauma that happens comes from emotional trauma of displacement with the family themselves, and specifically fathers maybe not having a good relationship for whatever reason in their children's lives. And there is data that supports that the better relationship that we have with children, the better the outcomes can be. Clearly, based off of your book, I Wish My Dad. And so here I am today having an opportunity to, one, put the organization out there, but really have a conversation that is much needed, which is the important role that a dad plays in its family's life.
Yeah. So you mentioned getting back to our roots. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you look at the Black and Brown community, years ago, say in the 30s and 40s, the family nucleus was centered around healthy parenting, which is a mom and dad in the household. And so due to post-traumatic, meaning after we came out of slavery, looking at Jim Crow laws, the incentivizing of the Black family to say we no longer need to have fathers in the household, looking at all of those factors that have played a role in the breaking up of the families, getting back to what it used to be when you hear the word family, a father and a mother being represented in that conversation. And so when I say getting back to what it used to be, it's really making sure that the representation of a father and a mother is there.
Now you said the intentional aspects of breaking up families. What do you mean by that?
So when you look at systemic racism and you start breaking down how the impact of welfare, the incentivizing of mothers to say, if I'm going to be able to take care of my family, I can be incentivized by doing so based off of the assistance that the government will give me if I'm a single parent household. And so there is a level of incentive created to say, I don't have to have a father in the household.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about too in the list of our topics.
Yeah.
What because in essence what you're saying there there was and is pressure on families because of capitalism to have people choose money over being connected to each other.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that goes both ways because you can say that a father is willing to make a certain sacrifice because of their job and say if they have to work 15, 20 hours, well, I'll say 15 hours in a day in order to be able to be a provider, then is that the proper sacrifice that should be made for the family, especially for the children, because that time is the biggest factor when we start talking in the work that I do, when I start talking to different men and boys of what was a critical factor for them. Being able to spend time with their dad was one of the number one things that came up. As a matter of fact, one of these stories that is in your book, I Wish My Dad, you talked about Phil, is an example of where the dad's role was, I'm going to set provision and I'm going to be able to be a provider. And so therefore the level of time may not necessarily be as valuable, which is important in forming a relationship, as being able to provide for my family. And so being able to understand how a healthy balance between the two is equally important, as opposed to just saying the money and the provision is the most important, and that's all that I'm going to be concerned about.
So are we looking at it through, how do we redefine what provision looks like through the lens of, am I looking to be present and be a parent while providing, or am I putting a premium on provision, right?
As a young boy, I can remember being able to wake up, and see a birthday gift, have a new bike, have new clothes to be able to go to school, and to be able to have the latest along with all the other kids. However, the value of my dad's time, where either we are sitting and watching a football game, or him showing up at a game, and during that game, me being able to look up in the stands and say, I have somebody that's there specifically rooting for me, and they have my best interest at heart. But also, too, at the end of that game, being able to have that conversation, how well did I do? Right? And being able to say immediately, hey, the feedback that he's giving me is more important than the feedback that I may receive from my coaches or my players, because I know that this is the person that is specifically rooting for me. And so therefore it sticks with me to hear how he felt about the result of that game, and specifically how well I played, as opposed to if he wasn't there at the game, if he had no clue what was going on, and all of a sudden he's giving me feedback about how I should be working out, he's giving me feedback about how I should be doing X, Y, Z. The bottom line is that I know he has a vested interest because of the amount of time that he also sacrificed in order to be present, in both of those factors. So I believe that that's the most important thing. But again, it's about having the balance to be able to have an opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Uh, After being in therapy for a while, what I realized was that my pursuit of attainment of more things, a nicer home, a car, and but even buying them nice things had nothing to do with them at all. But everything to do with me trying to soothe my childhood trauma because I
Mhm.
have
Yeah,
enough, right?
absolutely.
We did not have much. I did not have new nice clothes all the time. We were not taking trips and all of the fancy things. And so now, as an adult with the opportunity to make more money and do all of the things that I did not get to do as a child, I justified it through the lens of, I'm creating this life for you guys. When
Yeah,
reality was, I was trying to soothe the needs of my wounded child who always wanted those things.
absolutely.
As you saw in the book, my son said, we knew that you were always buying us things because you didn't know how to be a dad.
Oh, wow. Wow. And so let me ask you that question. When you got that feedback, how did it make you feel, for the audience, for those that may not have had an opportunity to really dive into the book?
I can't say didn't sting a little, but it did not sting as much as it could have had I not been doing my own
Gotcha.
work, right?
Yeah.
I think being in therapy for a number of years allowed me to be able to create space for my son to share his perspective and share how not having me present impacted his life without trying to explain away my actions, without trying to speak over him and take away his truth with my reasons. Not doing that because I was able to, fully be present and be honest with myself. I always tell people it's hard until you can be honest with yourself. You are not going to be able to accept honesty from anyone
Absolutely.
else, right?
Absolutely.
You got to be. So the things that he said were things I had already confronted in myself. I had
Absolutely.
already hit my
Yeah.
shadow. Uh, Allow me to say, yeah, say what you have to say,
Right.
because whether you say it or not, it's still true. It's
Right.
still in our relationship.
Right.
So let's out there and confront it so that we can begin the process of healing and creating a better relationship between us.
Children don't always have the capacity to articulate the issue that they are having. And so there is something where I say, tell me more. Tell me more about what it is that you're trying to express right now. So, for instance, if my son, if he turns around and he just says, well, I want to be able to spend more time with you. Okay, tell me more. How would you like to spend more time with me? What would that look like? What do you like doing? However, by just asking that question in order to elaborate more on what is happening or what they would like to see, at least gives them the ability to say, I am being seen and I am being heard.
So by question, what does love look like for you? What do you need from me in order to feel loved? And then getting that input and then responding accordingly to show people that show a person, be it your child or someone you're in a relationship with, that you are willing to love them the way that they need to be loved rather than loving them the way you feel they should want to be loved, right?
Absolutely. Professionally or corporately, I did allergy diagnostic testing. And in the allergy diagnostic testing world, they talk about a trigger threshold. And in that trigger threshold, it helps you to realize why you're having certain symptoms. Case in point, having a conversation about fathers may trigger people to be like, why are we talking about fathers, right? That fathers are non-existent or fathers are deadbeats, right? But the reality of it is that there are a healthy group of us out here that are doing an amazing job and have an amazing relationship with our children and our families, or even within our community, because some of us are stepping in and being kind of that father figure to those that may not have a father. And so the example that I use with the trigger is to say, if you hear certain perspectives, does it cause you to be uncomfortable? Does it cause you to be angry? Does it cause you to be dismissive about whatever that person's saying? And is that a healthy way to operate? Because if it's not, then it's something that you need to pay attention to and say, why does someone talking about the father son or the father daughter relationship, why does that bother me?
Being unhealthy is not compartmentalized, right?
Right,
If
right.
you have unhealthy relationships with your children, and I can speak to this because I did, right? I was always busy justifying my behavior. That's also how I showed up in other
Yeah,
relationships,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
Until I started doing my work
right,
and learning how to be present. And
right.
because being present in my experience was learned behavior,
Mm,
because I grew up in an environment where presence just wasn't a thing. Everyone
right,
was, you were always on your own.
right.
And now being a parent or being in relationship, learning how to be, in relationship with someone, to be still, to meet someone else's needs other than my own
Mm-hmm,
was something to learn.
mm-hmm,
Because I was in an environment where it was every man for himself,
mm-hmm.
and breaking that cycle required learning skills that were not given to me
Yeah.
when I was growing.
Yeah, yeah. And the even in Dr. Joy's book, Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, it just talks about the generational trauma that happens, the trauma that is handed down from one generation to another, and being able to break those cycles because now we are better equipped to understand what those traumas were and how can we address them. And hearing you talk about therapy, especially as a Black man, I believe that is one of the most important pieces to our puzzle that we can add because of the fact that either it's going to help us identify where we might be struggling, and that way we can do something about it, but it'll also give us the necessary tools to be able to overcome whatever those struggles are. I know for me, when I went through the therapy, I didn't realize from an emotional perspective, I was emotionally guarded and also shut off because of the fact that my relationship with my dad, I'd never seen my dad cry before. right? To this day, I've never seen my dad cry before. Now, that's not to say that I didn't cry, but from an emotional perspective, I was, for the most part, completely unemotional, especially when it came to being able to express certain feelings or certain expectations with regard to those feelings.
I can relate to the not being emotionally available to not only another person, but even emotionally available to myself, right? Uh,
Yeah.
where I could be, there was a time in my life where I could be alone and want to cry, but still not cry
Mm,
because
mhm.
of how I would start judging myself, right? So
Yes.
I'm curious, becoming emotionally available, like what does that look like?
So it provides empathy, compassion, and patience. And I think those three things are very important, whether you're a parent or whether you're a partner, because the empathy and compassion allows you to take a step back and understand what another person may be going through, regardless of whether or not it's something you've gone through or haven't experienced, or even think there's any validity to it. One of the questions that was asked during our summit in Chicago was how many men or do men believe that a man should just be able to cry, right? And there were mixed responses to that. And some of the responses was, well, I'll need to know why they're crying. I need to know if they cry about everything. There was all of these different, things that determine whether or not it was acceptable. But the reality of it is that regardless of why they're crying, they should be able to cry, right? It should not define who they are as men. It should not define their ability to do anything other than to express themselves in that way. Because the opposite of them crying is anger, potentially. And we know that there is oftentimes people that resort to violence because of the fact that them feeling vulnerable enough to get that emotion out, they'd rather be destructive. And so if we are putting a cap on how a person is able to express that raw emotion of being able to be vulnerable enough to cry, then we are really creating, people that can potentially become extremely destructive, in their attitude and their personality. But ultimately, I would say it allows us to be able to be compassionate, have some empathy, and also, most importantly, be patient because we don't know what that person is going through.
In my experience, was that at times people will then weaponize it when you are vulnerable and are transparent.
That can be extremely damaging, especially for men, because becoming vulnerable is not easy for most of us. But it's really important to communicate to that partner, and that partner needs to be understanding as well that, hey, this is trust. We're building trust. With me being vulnerable with you, this is trust. And there are certain guidelines or there are certain expectations, rather, that I have because I'm being vulnerable, especially if you're requesting this. If you're requesting that I be vulnerable, if you're requesting that I express myself in a certain way, be careful because one, I'm not 100% comfortable with it, and therefore I don't want it to be weaponized later. So I think having that conversation and that dialogue with your partner to help them understand, and if they are mature enough and if they are themselves healthy enough, they'll respect that, and I believe it'll bring the relationship closer. But again, we do have to be careful and be able to really figure out the level of vulnerability that we can have with that partner to where it's not devastating if something happens outside of them being able to or utilizing that and weaponizing it.
Yeah, so I want to pivot to this topic of co-parenting, right? Now, I've worked in a number of contexts and been in conversations with men and women around this.
Mhm.
And I found that in many of those instances, it is a hard thing to do. But I've also seen people do it extremely well, like where I've just been utterly impressed.
Mhm.
They're not in a relationship with each other anymore, but the way they show up for their child, you wouldn't think that they're in a relationship, but you are clear that they are very intentional about being a healthy model for that child.
Absolutely.
What is with that?
Yeah. So my personal experience is my son's mother and we've had our challenges. However, on most things, we've been able to resolve our differences to come to a happy medium. And the reality of it is that um, sometimes, again, the ego has to be minimized in order to say what is best for our son. It is tricky. I don't have a perfect solution because, again, just like most things, it's different for everyone. However, what I found, the more proactive I was when it comes to planning things, when it comes to finding out information for myself, whether it be medical, whether it be education for school, anything that is relating to him, the more information that I've been able to uncover independently, then now I can bring to the table to say, hey, this is coming up. Sometimes we have to have a little bit more compelling, argument to say this makes sense. And so why would we not do it
Yeah,
that way?
whenever people are engaged in relationship, and a lot of it is oftentimes in other cultures in
Mm-hmm.
Africa, where I've been in a conversation with people, people don't center themselves in every conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here, we center ourselves in every conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the conversation isn't about us, we're
Mm-hmm.
here through the lens of how would I handle that?
Mm-hmm.
What is that to me?
Mm-hmm.
How do I what they're saying? And we are putting ourselves in the center of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to parenting, I think I've learned now late in the game that
Mm-hmm.
the key in conversation with the other parent is centering the child in the conversation
Absolutely.
and removing yourself. The
Mm-hmm.
adversarial approach centers me,
Yeah.
what I want, how I feel, what this person is trying to do to me.
Mm-hmm.
If I remove myself and center the child, then I have a different set of questions and assumptions.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because when parents center themselves in the conversation that's really about the child,
Mm-hmm.
you run the risk of one parent also weaponizing the child.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. And to that point, that's why the relationship is with the children is so important because it makes it a lot harder for either parent to weaponize their position. When you have a good relationship with that child, they're more likely going to challenge, what that other parent may say or do because they're like, no, I don't think that's what daddy meant, or I don't think that's what mommy, and so I think having that relationship is so important because oftentimes you yourself may not have to specifically fight. The children may do it for you. They may recognize what's going on and say, "No, I don't think that's what's happening at all." But also, too, and even specifically for me, growing up with both parents, my dad being the more softer spoken, milder, laid back parent, he most times deferred to whatever my mom wanted to do. And sometimes they would play a back and forth. They'll be like, if I go to my mom, because I know he's most likely going to have me go to her anyway, I start off with her. And I'm like, hey, mom, can I go to this party? And if she turns around and says, well, ask your dad, then I'll ask her another question and say, hey, if dad says yes, then can I go? And so I would go and present that to my dad, and he would say no because he knows my mom is going to say no anyway as well. He don't want to get in trouble later on. And so, but I said all that to say the the balance of me seeing how both parents were constantly being on the same page about what the decisions were within the household um, led me to really want to place myself in that position to where I wanted to align myself with my ex-wife at the time or my wife at the time, it made me want to align. Now, there were many of times where, again, my ego, I had to take a step back and say, is this important enough for me to really disagree or really, quote unquote, put my foot down? Or is this a situation where I can show my son how getting your way is not always the best solution? Sometimes you have to, give in to things, even if you don't necessarily feel like, it's fair to you. And so, with that being said, there is no perfect answer, in my opinion. I believe that both parents have to be willing to have that balance and be willing to compromise on how they make those decisions. And that's harder than it is as me actually saying that right now, but it is doable. I've seen examples of that.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's an important conversation to talk about how to create a healthy co-parenting space, and how to, as you're pointing out, de-escalate situations between parents for the sake of what's the best benefit of the child.
yeah.
Um, you know, as I have this conversation, I'm well aware that I'm having all this enlightenment way too late in the game, right?
Right.
My kids are grown, right?
Right.
There's no more of having to talk to their mom about them. They're in their 20s now, right?
Yeah.
But I find that it's helpful for people who have young children, and it is contentious, to understand the impact that's having on the
Right.
child, but also to be self-reflective and realize, wait a minute, am I centering myself in this and making this all about me? And as a result, now weaponizing the needs of my child against the other parent. And to what benefit is that? That's obviously not helping the child, nor is it helping the two people co-parent well and model something healthy for that child,
Absolutely.
right? When you talk about, hey, I'm going to show my son what it looks like when you don't always get your way. Sometimes that's also modeling what it looks like to de-escalate something and not always be on the attack or on the defensive, because again, you have chosen not to center yourself in this
Mm-hmm.
situation, but to really center the question of what's in the best interest of my child,
Right.
right? And am I now weaponizing what I want or this child to just solely hurt the other person
Mm-hmm.
by saying yes or by saying
Mm-hmm.
no, just because I just want to hurt the other parent, right?
Exactly.
That's now, not only are you doing harm in that way, but you're also teaching that child, like, this is what you do. You can weaponize people against each other. And that,
Absolutely.
so you are nurturing a young person into becoming someone who will then weaponize emotions, weaponize other people. And obviously that's not something any of us want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we have to learn how to use the skills of de-escalating, removing ourselves from the middle of the conversation, focusing on what is best for everyone, even if I don't like it,
Absolutely.
right? Because I can dislike it and it still be the better thing to do,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
Which, which removes the ego from it, right?
Absolutely.
And is a part of just growing into becoming a better person, a better version of yourself.
Absolutely. One of the things also too that I want to point out is so from a co-parenting perspective, um, sometimes, well, let me take a step back. One of the things I want to say about co-parenting is going back to how important community played a role in our households. And I say that because as young parents, we don't always have the answers. We're trying to figure it out. However, when we had community, we had involvement of everyone coming together and playing an important role of how we can make better decisions and what better decisions look like. I believe probably in our parents' lifetime, they were maybe the first generation that kind of got away from that community involvement and being able to really influence what children are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And the reason it's important because I may not have enough wisdom and knowledge because of my age to be able to make certain types of decisions. But if I have healthy grandparents, if I have healthy great grandparents, aunt, uncles who have made some mistakes, but they've learned from them, now they can say, "Hey, allowing a baby to sleep in the bed with you is a no-no, and here's why. Allowing a child to just eat food that is unhealthy, that has no nutrition to it. This is why you don't want to do that." Understanding those things and being able to bring that to the table is extremely important because, again, as a young parent, you're trying to figure it out yourself. You're a couple years from being able to take care of your own self, let alone take care of another child.
I agree, but I think that there are layers and levels to it, right? So
Absolutely.
we just start with, hey, it's not healthy to let your kid always eat processed food. But then you got to layer in the fact that if you come from an oppressed community in the hood, that you don't even have access to healthy food, right? So
Absolutely.
you food desert.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple. Like some people are just eating what's available to them, right?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
what's available because
Hmm.
it's cheap and it's
Yeah.
here. But the dynamic of, nurturing, when you say talking about community and how you can learn from older, wiser people who have learned from their mistakes, that it's, as I thought about it, I was like, yeah, I grew up in an environment where, you know, one of my grandmother's friends down the street would call her and say, hey, he's up here acting up. I'm about to give him a whooping, right? And then I'm going to say, you handle your business with him, right? People were in community. But now, and we got to see parents model different ways of showing up for each other, sometimes unhealthy and sometimes healthy ways. But what we did see was that people were in connect. Things have changed, right? Oftentimes, I see people modeling what they see through social media in terms of what family looks like,
Mhm.
or through television, through entertainment, right?
Right.
And at that level, it's really less about parenting and it's more about procuring more
Right.
stuff, right?
Right. Well,
Parenting and relationship looks like the power couple and the kid who's dressed up in the most expensive things. It's like
right.
that's nothing at all. That's just provision. And
Right.
it's and the levels, the scale of that varies, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, this idea of creating community, it becomes a question of what does that now look like today,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That people are figuring out what their life looks like through literally social media apps, right?
Hmm.
And or just watching different things on television,
Hmm.
uh, rather than being an actual connection and proximity with
Hmm.
people who can, show up for you and put you up on game,
Yeah.
figure something.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I wanted to point out too, and Dr. Overton made a comment on our live, and she talked about you can really be creative as well. So being, in a underprivileged community, not necessarily having the resources does not mean you have to resort to, things that are unhealthy, because ultimately it's about the long game. The how does this impact you in the long run? And so there are other resources and creativity that can be inserted in those scenarios. So where, okay, if I can't afford to like, say for instance, if I can say, all right, I can get organic meat, or maybe you don't want to eat meat at all and you want to say, I'm going to stick to veggies, which are there are some that are affordable out there that you can make in bulk. There are fruit that you can make in bulk as well. One of the great things about Black people is that because of our struggle, we've been able to be some of the most creative people, on this earth. And again, being intentional allows the creativity to thrive. When you're intentional about your health, you are going to figure it out the same way. We've seen those that may say, okay, I want a pair of Jordans. Um, I'm going to try to figure out a way to get those Jordans. It's the same way you say, if I want to eat healthy, I'm going to try to figure it out because that's what I value and that's what's important to me.
I agree with you. But while you're saying that, I'm also thinking about all of this is true if you value your health. If you have you value your health and you have chosen to have a reason for why you want to be here
Yeah,
long term, right? And
absolutely.
I want to bring that up because I remember a time in my life where I had no vision of becoming an older adult. I had no vision
Hmm.
of what life looked like at 80. I for years I anticipated death.
Wow.
And so life was just a journey of waiting for this is going to be over one day, the music, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
I did not value life. I was not brought up in an environment that taught me to value my health
Hmm.
and life for to become an older person,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We have so many contexts right now and many people who don't have a vision of who they will become
Hmm.
in old age. Their health is not a priority, but attainment is a priority. So
Hmm.
yeah, if my if I don't have a plan to be here to 80, 90 years
Hmm.
old, right? Then I don't have my health isn't a priority.
Hmm.
And Jordans
Hmm.
are, right?
Hmm.
Because I have right now, I can have this right now.
Right.
I don't be here then. And the circumstances and the environment I'm in and the data says I might
Right.
not be, right?
Yep.
So you have and it's complicated because um, sometimes I don't think people are even aware that the way they're showing up for themselves
Hmm.
is rooted in an assumption that I don't have long,
Right.
and
Yeah.
to be to be brought into that awareness, and now gives you the chance to pivot, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm going to hustle hard to eat
Hmm.
well rather than hustle hard to buy
Yeah.
more stuff because
Yeah.
I be
Yeah.
here. And the two aren't in opposition,
Hmm.
but you now value not only your health but the
Hmm.
longevity of your life.
Right.
It's that not a simple cycle to break.
Yeah. One of the things that with my organization that I try to do is exposure. I think the lack of exposure, and you mentioned that earlier, being able to travel and being able to see different things, you quickly understood what is possible. And so I think those two go hand in hand when we start talking about value, because now when we're exposed to how people are doing things and how people are thriving, then our value system changes. And so when we start thinking about those that are in impoverished situations, and oftentimes the media gets upset about the entertainers, the athletes, and the drug dealers. And I say, well, that's the only exposure that they have. And so if your only exposure is something that may be considered negative, if those that are trying to make a change, if they can start saying, all right, if I'm an attorney, I need to make sure that I'm present in my community so that they see what is possible. If I'm a doctor, the same way, they need to see what is possible. Our communities are oversaturated with athletes, entertainers, and then the drug boys. And so if we want to be able to make a positive impact, being in the community in some capacity gives them a better understanding of what the possibilities are, because now they can see that this is attainable. Now they start to value it more because of the fact that now, oh, Kevin Durant came from my neighborhood. Ramel came from my neighborhood. Patrick came from my neighborhood. These guys came from my neighborhood. Now look at what they're doing. As opposed to, this is what my neighborhood looks like. This is all that my neighborhood has to offer. And therefore, my possibilities is, having the flyest car, having the dopest clothes, and having, the tightest female,
Yeah.
right? So the exposure increases the value and what we value, I believe, 10 times, over.
Yeah.
And so
Man, this
me traveling, it was, that was me traveling as a kid. I just remember we would go to Nashville, Tennessee for a church convention. We would go to different places, and just that little bit of exposure helped my dream get bigger of what was possible. But I
Yeah,
don't think,
that's what people are looking for is exposure, because even as you say that, I agree, but I'm also aware that travel is a
yeah,
privilege, right? You got to have some money to travel, and most people don't travel because they don't have the residual income to just say, oh, I'm going to not work and go travel and see things, or
mm-hmm.
their parents. So travel is a privilege. And I remember one time I was speaking in Nairobi and talking about therapy. And this lady brought it to my attention. She said, Ramal, therapy is a privilege, right? Therapy costs money, and people are trying to use money to care for their families.
Right,
And so I'm choosing between therapy and provision for my family. I'm choosing provision every time.
right,
So even as we, talk about exposure, you mentioned like people who are deemed successful going
mm-hmm.
back and modeling, going back to their communities. That requires time,
Mm-hmm.
sacrifice your time to see the greater value
Mm-hmm.
and go back and being a model. But I think and you pointed out, you said, look at what they've been able to do because they came from here too. So it's possible for me. That has layers to it.
Right,
But there's also, at this point in my life, the focus has become less on look at what I've been able to
mm-hmm.
accomplish, and or look at the kind of person I'm becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Like putting the emphasis on be a quality person, right?
Absolutely,
Live a healthy story of you,
mm-hmm.
because your attainment and whatever career you have, that's going to fade away.
Right,
But people will remember the quality of person you were, how
right,
you treat people, how generous
right,
you were, right? So, at this phase in my journey, it's less about, hey, look what I've been able to accomplish, but more about what's the story of me that I'm going to leave behind
right,
in terms of values, my generosity, how I
mm-hmm.
treat people, how I show up for people who need my
Right,
time, right? And
right,
the two aren't in opposition,
mm-hmm.
but don't mistake, tangible success with a quality person,
Absolutely,
right? Um,
absolutely,
you know, pursue being the best version of yourself that you can become,
right,
while you may also attain things.
right.
But if you never attain anything,
Mm-hmm.
you can still be a quality person.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I want to make sure that I'm clear on is it's about the possibility, right? And so being able to come back and expose the communities to what is possible. I never want to put a cap on what people's abilities are, because again, just like we spoke earlier, if they can figure out a way to get those Jordans, they can figure out a way. I've been able to travel, you know, paying less than $100 if I just bought the ticket on the specific day, or if I had the trip plan. There are provisions that can be made, but it has to be intentional, just like we talked about earlier. And we also have to understand that what is possible based off of other people that have been able to do it before us. And so oftentimes we look at our communities and we put a restriction on what their ability is, because we're saying, oh, they're just trying to survive. Well, yes, they're trying to survive, but also in addition to that, there are possibilities that are also there. And again, looking at the history in this country of what Black people have been able to accomplish on less than, arguably anybody else, I'd go to challenge anybody to say, hey, it's not always where that person is that's going to determine what they're able to accomplish. And so I push back when I start trying to make that decision for anyone that is not in a position to be able to do whatever it is that they're able to do, because again, we've been some of the most creative people. I remember a comedian talking about you know the Black community not being overly concerned about the recession, because we've been able to figure it out as far back as you can, consider. And so, with that being said, I don't like to put a cap, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but I don't like to put a cap on helping our community dream of what is possible,
Yeah, that's,
regardless of what their circumstance.
yeah, that's what I was getting at. Getting people to break out of the cycle of a survival
Hmm.
mindset, right? Or a scarcity
Hmm.
mindset, right? Because what's required before you can take the steps. You have to shift your mindset and
Hmm.
shift the way you see life, the way you think about yourself,
Hmm.
the way you see abilities.
Yeah.
But I think we're saying the same thing. It's just
Oh
like
yeah.
start
Yeah.
with awareness of if this is where the person's head is and that's what's shaping behavior,
Hmm.
I got to start with changing that mentality before I can change the
Yeah.
behavior. Because I've worked with people over the years where I've tried to change behavior without dealing with the mentality, and it was
Hmm.
for time before the belief system that was rooted in them showed right back up and
Absolutely.
self-sabotage. So
Absolutely.
reconditioning the
Hmm.
mind and the beliefs about life will then move the behavior, right?
Absolutely.
But you
Absolutely.
follow your mindset. Um,
Absolutely.
as all of us are doing that right now,
Hmm.
in every way possible.
Yeah.
But we've been on for almost an hour. This is a rich conversation, man. I
Yes.
really doing this, but I want to give you the opportunity to just, leave a couple of things with folks. Like this recording will be chopped up into a number of clips. If there are 2 points that you believe in your work are important for people to know, what would those 2 points be?
Oh man, I wish that I had more points, but since you're only giving me two, I will try to sum it up. Number one is healing, and I talked about triggers earlier. A lot of times our behavior is based off of how we feel about ourselves and how that turns up in our spaces that we enter in. And so it is so important that we're in a good headspace, we're in a good emotional space, and we're in a good physical space, because that gives us the ability to be able to be intentional about the decisions that we're making. That gives us the ability to be considerate of the other people that are in those environments. And it gives us the opportunity to really thrive as we are, whatever capacity that may be. So that's number one. And then number two is the level of patience. I feel like in everything that we do, and me, myself included, I've worked on a level of patience that allows me to not make a irrational decision. Because oftentimes, when you talk about the short gain, GAIN, the short gain can oftentimes be more critical and cost you more than if you just took a little bit more time and a step back to say, what other provisions or what other plan can I put in place to make sure that this is more of a long term investment or a long term effect on my decision that I'm making? Or even when it comes to partnership, it can be, either it's going to help me thrive with me and my partner, or it could be to our demise. So those two things, healing and patience, are the two things that I would add, for food for thought, if you will.
Yeah, that's a good word. Healing and patience, and being patient with yourself in the
Absolutely.
process. I tell people, offer yourself some grace, right? And realize that this life is a marathon, not a sprint. Give yourself,
Hmm.
be patient with the process, do your work, clarify your intentions, and the change you'll live into the change.
Absolutely.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
healing and patience. Patrick, thank you so much for doing this, man. We will have to do it again for sure.
Absolutely.
Blog, and I'm glad we were able to connect. Thank you, Dr. Joy. I know you'll probably see this, for connecting Patrick and I. And
Absolutely.
until next time,
Yes,
man. If you ever,
sir.
we'll have to link up.
Oh, for sure. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm gonna echo what you're saying. Thank Dr. Joy for connecting us and for the fabulous work that she does as well. And I'm just grateful that you have provided your time in order to have this conversation and really, give my organization some exposure. So thank you.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon, brother.
Thank
Peace.
you. Have a good one.